So we have a two-part series. This is Leadership in Practice. This is our 15th session, our 15th class in the series. And we have a two-part series. So we're going to cover part one today, which is all around the problem. And the title is around the cost of our imbalances. And then, so here, let me put this on the slide here real quick so you can see this. Give me 1 second. Let me share my screen.
There was a class we taught, LIP 13, 3 weeks ago. We called it BIBS Part 2. If you were there, awesome. If not, you can refer to it if you'd like. But what Charlie's about to show you is something that we taught called PEMS. It stands for it's the pyramid of health. It's the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health of an individual. This is how we're all, and you can Google this. This has been around forever. But the idea that to be healthy, you have physical, you have emotional, mental, and spiritual. We'll go through this, but we talked about how it's really about how you help yourself and grow yourself for the purpose of the better you, which is helping others. And that's kind of like why we're all here on the planet, right? We have to take care of ourselves and then help others. So we taught a series on how to schedule your week and use your week where you're taking care of yourself and helping others in a weekly rhythm, a weekly battle rhythm. So that was LIP 13, but we're going to refer to it again today. So just wanted to remind you if you wanted to go check that out. It was LIP number 13, BIBS Part 2.
So the two-part series, right? So this is 15 and then we'll do 16, and we're going to cover the problem in depth today, which is the cost of our imbalances that we have in our lives. And then part 2 will be all around solutions, which we're going to cover next week. And the punchline of it is tied to what we call TP, finding your teammate or your training partner. And so we're going to cover that in depth next week.
We were just talking about this before, that we think it's pretty bold, but we think it's the most important topic we've taught to date, which is why we're stretching it out into a two-part series. And who knows, maybe it'll go a little bit longer.
Yeah. And so when we think about the root foundation of consistent high performance, now this is a class on leadership, and some of you are not leaders yet, but are leaders in training. The root foundation of consistent high performance is the opposite side of the same coin of the root cause of where things go wrong, how things break apart. And when you think about it differently, it's almost like looking at health versus being unhealthy, not only in a physical sense, but the vessel that we are as individuals, how important it is to consistently be healthy, or you're actually consistently being unhealthy. A lot of leaders we've met have always said, none of us are staying still. So unless you are in your grave, we're always moving as human beings. We're never still, meaning we're always either getting better or we're getting worse. We're getting healthier or we're getting unhealthier. And oftentimes by default, the choice to not do something lets things atrophy. And I'm sure we've all seen this, especially during COVID. A lot of people talk about the COVID-19, right? Gaining 19 pounds. You let your good habits of exercise, your good habits of nutrition go, and people let things go. And that default that tends to happen to us makes us, once again, not staying still, but we're getting worse and worse. And the notion of how do we deliberately change that trend from getting worse to getting better, and understanding how that happens, the depth of the problem. So as we said, we think out of the 15 classes, including today to date, this is probably the most important class. It's probably the one topic we have spent more time over 26 years meeting the best in sports, medicine, business, military, global leaders, researchers, academics. And they all point to different ways to talk about the same thing, which is around understanding our imbalances and the danger of imbalances, because what imbalances make us do is we compensate for them. We always compensate. And so it seems okay in the short term, but we compensate and we compensate and we compensate until one day we break. And those moments that we break are the most costly things that tend to occur in our lives. For example, Charlie Munger, right?
Yeah, I don't know if so Charlie Munger is really the partner of Warren Buffett, one of the most successful businessmen. And there's a quote that we like that we wanted to share with you. I'm just going to read it to you. He said, it's remarkable how much long-term advantage people like us have gotten by trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent. So trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent. So it's like the what not to do, you know, the idea that being aware of your problems and solving for them is a huge part of winning. If you know the problem, you can solve for it. In fact, I don't know if you guys saw Dr. Gorman, Peter Gorman, a few weeks ago, he talks all about balance in the physical sense, or imbalances in the physical. He was a chiropractor, but if you're aware, right, if you know the right thing, if your body knows the right thing, even physically, you can self-correct. But if you're not aware of it, if you don't know the right thing, you can't correct it, right? So just being aware of the problems is a big part of winning.
And a huge part of that awareness, what ends up happening is we don't recognize what's bad for us. And without recognizing what's bad for us, as I said, no human being is staying still. We keep trending, we keep feeding into these unhealthy zones. And then we keep thinking the compensation's enough until the moments we break. You think about baseball with errors. You think about football with turnovers. You think about just things in your life when you think back to what has cost you the most, whether it's a promotion, whether it's someone on your team quitting on you, whether it's someone doing even worse things, losing relationships. It's what we often call psychological slips. They're things, if I could go back in time, I wish I could have done that conversation over. I could have handled that situation differently. And if we start to understand the pattern, because there are mistakes, but there are often patterns of what occurs repeatedly in our lives. And those are the most dangerous errors. The repeated errors, if you think about it, are the errors that we're making by choice. If a mistake happens once, the accidents do occur in all of our lives, and we need to learn how to deal with accidents. We need the resilience. We need the fortitude and the ability to recover from accidents. But when something occurs more than once in our lives, repeated errors, thematic errors, those are the most costly ones, because now it's happening by choice. We're choosing to not be aware of these repeated patterns. We can act like victims. We can act like it's someone else's fault, the institution's fault, my boss's fault, my children's fault. I mean, the list goes on and on. But when there are things that we could have done differently, it's like, I always use the example, we have a lot of engineers of video games, right? Most engineers love playing video games. But when they play video games, right, no matter how obscure it might seem, they don't try the exact same thing again if you died the last time going this path. They sometimes will go backwards. They'll try sideways, underground. You're constantly trying a different path because you don't want to die making the same error. Now, video games have become easier where there's auto save. So you can, if you want, be repeatedly stupid, right? As you know, Charlie Munger said, like, you can consistently be stupid and play the same way and just go nowhere. But before autosave occurred, and many of you on the screen, I think, were around when we had arcade games at quarters, right? There is no autosave. You play Mario Brothers or Donkey Kong. I mean, it's like if it ends, it ends. You have to start all over again from the beginning. And you can imagine that next quarter you put in, I mean, you're not going to try the same thing. You're going to try something different. And I think it's something that we often don't do in the most important part of our lives. We'll do in video games, but not in the most important part of our lives. So let me go back into sharing my screen here. So we're going to just stay on this one slide, and we're going to kind of just annotate against this and help you follow. So give me 1 second here.
The video game thing is a whole other topic someday. I do feel the reason the kids are less resilient is because they never die in the video games, like forever winning.
That's true.
Ugh,
So we are here to talk about leadership, but oftentimes if that is less relevant for you, it's such a parallel to parenting. Rarely will you find a great leader who is not a great parent, and vice versa. Rarely do you find a horrible leader who also isn't a pretty bad parent. There's such similarities. One, you have what we call children, right? Your kids. Other one you have, they call subordinates. But there's such similarities because when you do leadership right, there are such similarities to parenting in the sense of they become your protege. And once again, when parenting is done wrong, whether they call it snowplow or helicopter parenting, submarine parenting, whatever you call it, you try to micromanage the child. Micromanaging the child doesn't work so well, as we mostly know. But the same thing occurs in leadership. Micromanagement of subordinates doesn't work so well. And the idea of thinking of your child or your subordinate as a protege means, as a leader, one of the most important parts of your job, there's many parts, but a big part of our job is actually being their coach, making them better. The day you met them to the day they leave you, they should have gotten that much better. Meaning the trajectory they were on before they met you, you should have been able to significantly buck that trend to be higher than if you weren't in their lives. Same thing with parenting, right? So when we think of leadership and parenting, so this pyramid we had covered, as Megan mentioned, in one of our earlier classes, I think it was LIP 13, we said, right? Yeah. Brilliant in the Basics, part 2. So if you want to look at that video, it'll be in there. This pyramid, we had gone from one of the top performance coaches in the world, Jim Lear. He runs and built what they call a Human Performance Institute. He's like he's 80 something years old, written 19 bestseller books. But this pyramid, we call it PEMS for short. PEMS is because it's backwards in terms of starting with the foundation of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And this is how a human being operates at its best. When you are trending all cylinders in equal doses, you will do well. Equal being not 25, 25, 25, but in the right breakout, balanced growth in this. But life is always about imbalances. So this is where you have to understand, although the biggest problem is our imbalances, and so our attempt to always balance our imbalances, you'll never grow without getting imbalanced. So this is kind of the counterintuitive aspects of understanding imbalance. But as we spend time on this, and when you look at this physical, think of physical as the sleep, exercise, nutrition. When you think emotional, I want you to think about our character. I want you to think about our intuition. I want you to think about, Daniel Kahneman, another researcher, called our system 1, our fast thinking intuition, versus our more analytical brain, which is system 2. Mental is more like technical skills. Think like whether it's public speaking skills, analytical skills,
PowerPoint
skills, right?
Things that you can learn.
Fixing engine skills and airplanes, coding is a skill. Spiritual, not being religion, but the act of helping others. And the way we summarize this as a company is what we call better me plus better you. So I'm just going to pull up plus here. And it's fascinating how many people who over the years who've met us mistake that better me comes first, then better you. A lot of people will say, better you, better me. It's kind of a quid pro quo.
Like I take care of you and then you'll take care of me.
I'll pay for lunch, you pay for a meal next time.
Yeah.
And that's that kind of bartering, what Adam Grant, another researcher, called the matcher, right? We tend to matchmake. Versus better me is take care of yourself in order to help others. The oxygen mask theory, you need to learn to mask yourself before you can mask someone else. You go further in helping others if you learn to take care of yourself. And the imbalance of this is where a lot of problems come in. Mm-hmm. The imbalance of better me versus better you is one of the first places where problems occur. Another way to look at it is better me is filling our own cup. Better you is so that I can spill over unto others. Now, there are many ways that people do this wrong too. Oftentimes, we have a lot of people, there's half a dozen billionaires who are investors in our company over the years. And it's fascinating, some of the more horrible examples I've had to experience was billionaires telling me that they don't give because they don't know how to give. And it always reminded me of a story. My mother is a pastor of a church. She would talk about, there's a parable or story of this poor man putting in, 2 copper coins into the offering box. And, people are mocking him. And yet the lesson is that that person gave more, right? That person gave more than everyone that was around. That giving is also a muscle. Helping others is a muscle. But it is something that you must do, like most muscles, on a consistent basis. And you get stronger and stronger over time. And a lot of times we tend to go into, well, I can't because I don't have enough. And so we would say, I have a goal where I need to have my house fully paid off. I need no debt. Maybe I need a net worth of, say, $1 million, then I'll start to give, right? And help others and help charities at that point. And then as we pursue our own cup growth, we say, you know what? I'm just going to upgrade the size of my cup because the people I'm around seem to have a goal that goes to 5 million. And one house isn't enough. Now you need 2. And now you want to be able to also do X, Y, and Z. So we're continually upgrading the size of our cup versus you fill your cup so you can spill over onto others. Then you upgrade your cup. Then you spill over onto others and so forth. And that laddering of back and forth and better me, better you. And what we have found in practice, to give you some guidance, is think approximately 20% versus 80%. Meaning when you think and audit our time and energy spent. Now remember, this changes, of course, over time and age, right? Obviously, as an infant, there is no better you, right? You're just taking, right? So when you're born in the first year of your life, maybe even the first 2, 3, 5 years, you're just about better me, right? And which is why parenting, obviously, is so important to be able to nurture a child. As you get to the end of your life, it will flip. You might be at 80% better you. But you'll see, and this is kind of one of the biggest insights was even in why child psychology was so big and now adult psychology and sort of adult learning has become so big, is that although our physical body stopped growing at roughly 23, 24, our mind does not stop growing. And so being a lifelong learner and being a lifelong accumulation of better me is the key, even at the oldest of ages, to be able to consistently better you better. But so once again, the imbalance between this better me, better you. So I'll give you some examples, maybe some kind of negative examples. When I say negative, we always like to understand how things fail. If you understand how things fail, to Warren Buffett's TP, Charlie Munger's, you can try to avoid and be aware of how consistently stupid we can be as human beings. So in leadership, one of the common things we hear from a leader about their subordinates, that person doesn't want my help, doesn't want my coaching, doesn't want my guidance. And the leader acts almost like that industrial age supervisor, right? The inspector, right? The inspector general, right? So being a boss, being a leader can be like an inspector general. I'm here to just test you, inspect your work, inspect what you expect. And so the job of leadership just becomes inspection. And yet the difference in the relationship when they want your guidance, when they want your thinking, right? I want to know what you think about this. Here's my approach. Here's the way I made sense of this. Am I missing something? When someone comes to you for advice versus they don't want you. And when you call on them, when you email them and you ask for a meeting, the silence response that you don't hear from them, the nonverbal response is, oh, God, I gotta meet with my boss. And my weekly check-in.
Don't you laugh, Laura. I see you smiling.
Whether it's the 8 o'clock check-ins or 9 o'clock check-ins or the end of day check-ins, right? I'm sure as a leader, you're thinking it's really important and super helpful for the team. If we actually polled secretly the people who report into you, most of them might say, oh, I got to go to my check-in. It's such a waste of time, but I got to go and do this. And it's like I'm being inspected, and you go around and kind of report versus someone who is seeking you out. And a good litmus test oftentimes is this. We run a lot of coaching sessions, both internally and externally. And people have things happen in their lives, right? So they suddenly have a doctor's appointment or they have vacation. So, something you scheduled ahead of time, that's a weekly meeting or monthly meeting, they can't make. Because, things don't always work the calendars. The number of calls and dial-ins we get from literally the airport or literally in their cars while they pull.
Pre-COVID airport, but yeah.
Okay, pre-COVID airport, but even now in cars. Yes. People pull on the sideways to dial in for the coaching session. People in airports either going through security quickly or staying out of security in order to dial in for a coaching session. These litmus tests tell you how much people want your advice, your guidance, versus the reality for most is they don't want it. Now, on the similar front of how things go wrong, right? So I'm covering sort of this first part of how things go wrong, right? On parenting.
Actually, that's the same thing on the kids' side. You're right on the parenting. So Mackie, who's a basketball coach, runs a nonprofit. If you've seen, he's teaching a class in COA on how to build toughness in children. I don't know if you guys saw this, right? But he does talk about when the kids don't want your help, right? It's like when they're quiet and they're not listening, at some point they just start tuning you out. Like you have to, it's a whole other topic, but when they're not ready and they don't want to hear from you, like it's awful, right? They don't want your coaching. It's
And you know, like as a parent, what do we
just want
feel?
to shove down your advice.
We feel they're not listening. We feel they're obtuse. We feel they're entitled. They're ungrateful. You feel underappreciated. And over time, we build resentment, right? As a parent. And you wonder sort of, this is the whole, like, I'm trying to offer my better you. I'm trying to help you, but instead you're making me feel like I'm force feeding my help on you and you don't want it. And there are times where, you know, like you need to force and put help on that people don't know they need. So there are always times for that too. But there's a lot of times in parenting and leadership, right? We're not understanding what is going wrong. Why is it that despite my best of intentions as parents or as a leader, right? I have more experience, I'm seeing things, but they don't seem to want my help. And so I go to this flip side down here of when it's done right. When you are actually when done right, what occurs? And this is so, in many ways simple, but we tend to fail understanding. They're always watching us. They're watching us and we are an example. We are an example as they watch how we run our lives. If you are disheveled, if you look unhealthy, you're yawning all the time, have low energy, you have to wonder why they don't want your help. Do you ever go to a doctor for advice on anything healthy and you look at them and you're like, I'm not sure I want this person's advice? Yeah. Do you ever get a personal trainer where you're like, I don't want my body to look like that, so I'm not sure I want to do their workouts? Or a nutritionist who might give you advice, like they need to look the part. You need to look the part. It's a huge part of what they call integrity, right? You need to be able to walk the walk and be the example first. And not once, but all the time.
Consistently, that's the hardest part.
And when you do it right, there are things that happen, good things. They respect you. In fact, they look up to you. And you know what people do? They want your guidance.
When you're the example is basically what it is. You're the example of someone that they want to be like, right? It's as simple as that. They want to be like you, and they literally want to find out like what you eat in the morning, what you listen to, what books you read, right? They just want to be like you.
They want your life advice.
Yeah.
They want to know, right? Kind of, so, sorry, you can't see it partly on the screen here.
I think they can, because this is just our...
Yeah, so, but they want your guidance, they want life advice, they want your coaching, right? This is the place you want to build to. This is the place where when you see that the better me, better you is in balance, you will start to see all the signals of how things go wrong in parenting and leadership. Versus when it's right, you will see the opposite. As Megan mentioned, their level of curiosity to understand every ritual and nuance that makes you tick is what they want to learn and know. So that's where we want to get to, right? So that's the first step. But the second part then is now looking in greater depth of what goes wrong within the better me, right? Because within the better me, there are three parts. And in fact, the best way I would explain this part is what we call the body versus the mind. And we've done a lot of work with the best in the field on this, including sort of all our time. And so what we have found, and this is work that we did with some of the best psychologists in the world, as well as this woman, Daniela, who teaches a series, and you can see in the videos, she is curing autism. It's one of the most amazing people we've met. And when you're curing autism, she has 6 farms where she uses the physical setup, because someone who's autistic, they lack the ability to communicate. And she was a German psychologist, but you can't communicate with your patients. She had to come up with ways to start with the body before she could help work on their minds. Oftentimes, and we found this same theme working with some of the top psychologists, it's so difficult to work on the mind. They said that it's easier to start with the body. And the general formula that we got was approximately 15%. Meaning,
of the better me,
within, if you go, so if you look at this whole pie is 100%, right? The body can only accomplish so much, but oftentimes we go there first because it's easier to start there. You see someone who's stuck in life. That's the same as being frozen. The first thing you try to do is get them to get up, right, and move. Move your feet, just get active. That's the notion of working in the body, right? You want to become, that guy Peter Gorman that Megan mentioned, Doc. You want to be a fast thinker, learn to be a fast mover, right? If you want to, they're opposites. There are people who are too hyper. You want to slow down, right, and learn to be more patient. Well, learn to do slow movement as well. Whether it's yoga, whether it's meditation, they're slow moving that will then feed into, slow thinking and vice versa. Fast moving, fast thinking. The body is 15%. So then you look at what is left, right? So 20% up on top for the spiritual, right? As I mentioned before. And so you have the body at 15%, and that leaves you 65%. So mental, the technical side, when everything we've looked, and what's fascinating is this, as technology has gone stronger, artificial intelligence and learning tools, whether it's the Khan Academy, whether it's lynda.com, there's so much online learning. YouTube itself has so many 30-second, 2-minute videos to learn almost anything. 20
years ago, learning to code, right? Software engineering, software coding was such a, it was like the skill to learn. It's so complicated. And there, obviously it's still complex, but relative to what it was 20 years ago, you can learn to code. There are companies who literally help you learn to code. Code Academy does this, right? In a week. That's crazy compared to 20 years ago.
We have taken
technology's gotten simplified.
We have taken people who have no engineering background at all, did not study engineering in school, and turned them into engineers in 1 to 2 weeks. What used to be difficult in technical training is getting easier and easier. What Steve Jobs did with the phone, creating the iPhone and then iPads and everything else, is they don't even come with instruction. Do you remember anything technical we got before? We still have many that have like manuals that are so thick, right? It's like 100 pages of things you have to read to understand how it works. Now, like you get it with, it's what they call user interfaces or user experiences. In tech, it's called UI, user interfaces, or UX.
My 5-year-old, you should give them a new iPad, but they're like 5 years old. They figure out how to use that. There's like no instruction.
And so what has happened in the world is everything technical is getting easier and easier to the point where there is no such thing anymore as a user error. It's almost always an engineer error. It's built incorrectly if you don't anticipate what the user will do. And that comes down to how you even use PowerPoint, how you do analytics. And so this number is shrinking fast, but the number we have generally seen is around 15%. Meaning if you're spending more than 15% on average within a week, within a month, say within a month, on technical training, you're probably overdoing it. If you're putting 0, it's not good either. So whether it's learning, skills of analytics and presentation and whatnot, that's around 15%. On the physical side, if you're spending more than 15%, you're probably overdoing it, unless it happens to be your craft. Like if you're an Olympic athlete, yes, it's different, of course. But even then, we've spent time with some of the best Olympic athletes. You'll be surprised how much of their training is on the mind. And when you look at the training in the mind and the work in the military, that's been fascinating for us. We thought, won't most people in the military spend most of their time doing push-ups, pull-ups, right? Learning the technicalities of how to fire weapons, and fly jets. And yet so much of the training in the military, right, falls along with the same pattern we saw in Olympic sports teams. We saw in, the best fields of anything you can imagine, which is the bulk of the training went right here. The 50%, the single biggest pie was around the training of our character, training of understanding our emotions, our intuition. Another way to look at this is character is one way to look at this. Intuition. The best way I think to look at this is the word judgment. Human judgment is the 21st century supercomputer, meaning computers, artificial intelligence, technology can do a better job of anything repeated. Anything that has a pattern can be done better by technology. But when things are new, as in there is no data because it's brand new. Data is always from the past. So data is looking at an exhaust of what happened. When something is new, something is invented, something is created, the only computer, the only machine that is able to navigate uncertainty, that's able to navigate something you've never seen before, is the human being. And the power, the 21st century power of human beings in judgment, the supercomputer, and this is the key, it does not work well when you're solo. It only works well when you're part of a team.
Because your intuition is half wrong, right? It's half right and
That's
half wrong.
covered in depth in research. They show that our judgment, what we call blind spots, our biases, we tend to be wrong close to half the time. So if you don't find the right teammate, if you don't find the right team to help catch your blind spots and be good for each other in that front, your supercomputer of judgment does not work. Getting it right half the time is usually not good enough. That will lead to a lot of failure. But when you actually get the right team, performance tends to go in what they call the 95% plus, which is what you would call an A leader. And who wants to be managed, coached, taught by a leader who's a B leader? Someone who's not in the category of being an A. And that means, like, being human, we have the right to make mistakes. We do make mistakes, right? It's just only human. But out of 100 decisions, you get to get 5 wrong. To consistently get 95 or more correct, they say for most leaders, if you are a B leader, as in you get 15 wrong calls out of 100, you should be fired. You should be replaced. The bar is very high. So when we look at this notion of this side of emotion, now here was what was interesting. Human beings are so imbalanced in this largest category of intuition, judgment, emotion, character. We generally, as adults, have the EQ, the emotional quotient, right? The emotional intelligence of a 16-year-old. The average adult has the emotional intelligence of a 16-year-old.
Isn't that crazy?
So
yeah, the Barry Jones.
Yeah.
There's a, sorry, were you going to
Yeah,
share this?
yeah,
But
yeah.
there's a guy, Barry Jones, who's, I think he's in his 80s now.
Yeah.
He's much older, but from Harvard, who did all this work on emotional intelligence and even conflict and conversations with individuals. And he has this whole program he runs up in Harvard. But he basically told a team member of ours who went through this class that the average individual, average adult has the emotional intelligence of a 16-year-old. That's crazy. As in, when they deal with conflict, they're acting like a 16-year-old. When they're dealing with other adults, so at work, at home, it's nuts. We're talking about even like social media.
Yes.
If you think about it, your intuition now being shared in social media, which the world is kind of imploding right now and crazy. It's because you can share your intuition with the world, like immediately through social media and different channels, but it's like 16-year-olds fighting with other 16-year-olds, which is kind of where we're getting what we're getting, right? Some of that conversation.
The interesting discussions, say, even in social media, is think about whether it's Twitter or any aspect of social media. People share their intuition.
Yeah.
It's not like,
Filtered.
when you now text, it's not like who writes a text, hit save as draft, and I'll text that later, right? Most people literally are writing it as fast as it comes out of their mind to fingers and boom, out.
Mm.
And so you're putting out your intuition. You're putting out your judgment. Now look at all the hate that occurs in social media and on the internet, right? There's a lot of talk nowadays about Twitter has become such a hateful place. How do we fix this? The social media has become such a place of judgment and hate. Well, do you remember what happened when we were 16 years old?
Yeah.
Imagine as a 16-year-old, if you could actually speak your mind and say what you want to say, judging everyone as we all are all the time, and just putting it out there. And then letting all the other 16-year-olds judge you back in real time. Welcome to social media, and welcome to what's happening. When you go and sit back and if you ever get an opportunity to visit another organization and watch when there's an argument, a difficult conflict-ridden discussion by the leadership of a team.
It does sound like teenagers.
And if you thought, imagine if they were all 16 years old and are having this discussion.
Like, okay,
someone makes a funny joke and next thing, they're cracking up on something and getting off topic and trying to look good, and someone's got to say something just so they sound intelligent. They're falling when they really have been checked out the whole time. It is literally like watching a room of 16-year-olds. And that research of the 16-year-old adult has shown up in a lot of places. We did a lot of work with Brene Brown, who's a big TED Talk speaker, and she shared with us, when it comes to developing emotions, boys are taught to stop facing the reality of what they feel starting at 5 years old. Starting at 5, it's almost like, hey, you don't want to share, you have to share, so suck it up.
Or, don't cry.
Yeah, don't cry.
Don't cry,
right?
cry, don't cry. Like no emotion.
There's
cry.
a denying of our emotions. And without having the space to go there, we don't have the space to discover and become aware and understand both the good and bad of it. They say girls are given till 11 before they're told to deny their emotions.
That's why our emotional intelligence is off the charts relative
6
to
years
boys.
off the charts compared to boys. But either way, we get to a place where that's not enough.
Yeah.
And the amount of training that's required there is often the single biggest area of our better me, our cup not being full.
And I think emotion, back to the pyramid of emotion, when you hear the word emotion, emotional, it conjures up, it's just taboo. People don't like to talk about it. When you think of emotion, most people don't think of it as that there's the second brain is your emotion, your gut is your, it just has like a lot of baggage, emotion, especially in male-driven industries, even in the engineering side, to whether it be, people don't like to talk about it. And I was saying to Charlie, on the insecure side versus maybe the arrogant side, I think why people don't like to talk about emotion, for one, it doesn't feel like a hard business need, but I think that's so, believe that's so incorrect, but it has, it's painful to look at your emotions. It's painful to look at, like what Charlie was talking about in the beginning, the repeated thematic errors we make in our judgment being tied to our emotions and our character. And it's just something people just don't like to talk about. It's like, can't we just move on and can't we just get to the work? It's almost like get to the work is the skills part. Can we get to the PowerPoint? Can we get to the product? Can we get to this presentation? Can we get to the work? But the work is your judgment, but nobody wants to talk about why their judgment is flawed.
There was an individual we met in the military. I love what he had shared, saying when it comes to decisions are basically our judgment, making those calls. We get it wrong by literally a margin of around 8 seconds. If we all had a time machine that could go back 8 seconds, you could catch most of these huge psychological slips in judgment and decision making. Have you said something and you're like, God, if I can go back 8 seconds, this whole thing would have led to a different place, right? How many times have you made that repeated error and you're like, God, why did I do that again? 8 seconds would have allowed you to go back. It's the same thing. When you fire off an angry, emotional email, maybe you keep caps lock on and decide to write it in all caps. So it's the equivalent of screaming at someone, and you hit send. If you could go back 8 seconds, you could prevent most of those terrible emails that go out. 8 seconds. In fact, it was interesting the way they train world chess champions, because they know decision-making slips occur that way. Chess players are trained to write down on paper what they're going to do as a move before they move in order to try to catch that little gap of 8 seconds. So I want to move my, my pawn up those 2 spaces. Like I write that down, then I make the move. And that delay is what they instill in. So want you to take maybe 30 seconds. If you go into the chat, at the bottom, there's a chat feature, and just type in what are you thinking? What questions, thoughts? If you can just put 30 seconds in, I just want to get a read from the audience. So we covered the notion of imbalances, starting at the high level of better you, better me, then diving within better me where it breaks apart the most. I'll give you 30 seconds to. There's a lot of good thoughts here.
Yeah.
Christina's, how do I develop my thought more before I let it out of my mouth? It's fascinating, that question Christina asked.
There's so many good ones now. Love it. Actually, Chris is from the Navy, bringing up with the spouse is something we were talking about too. I think I have maybe someday I'll share this whole, my great mother, great wife, great leader I want to be, and how hard it is. You have to better yourself to be a great mother, to be a great wife, to be a great leader. It's like, God, it's so hard to do all of that, and the parallels across, like learning how to do this.
So I'll read some of the ones that are coming through. There's a lot of great thoughts here. Christy from Colombia talks about, emotions always made my previous boss very uncomfortable. I had to prepare for those conversations. You know what they say that occurs oftentimes when two adults get together? You both come acting. You're both acting now. You're anticipating the other person's anticipation. So next thing you know, we're having an entire conversation and we're not quite sure who's being real. I'm reacting to your acting and you're acting to my acting. And then the worst that occurs is when we start to react and give feedback to each other, what you really want to say is, but that's not really what I think. I said it because I thought that's what you'd want to hear. And now you're giving me advice on what I don't even really believe. And this is where things really spiral out of control often.
And I think this is where I think a few people were asking this question. I think the first one from Monica started with, how do I block the baggage, bringing baggage into different conversations. And this is where it's going to come down to what we're wanting to go into more detail next week is around the training partner, because there are safe places to have those conversations and there are places where you don't want to have those conversations, right? Like the notion of sharing it with somebody that you trust. We call TPs trusted partner, talking partner, training partner. It stands for thinking partner. The safety circle. If you can have that conversation first, Monica, or even Christy, with somebody that you trust, by the time you go in and have it with somebody maybe you don't quite trust as much or who really struggles with those conversations, getting it out to another human being first on whatever emotional baggage there is, versus I think trying to block it is the exact reason why it's like you actually can't block it. Like, yes, you can be in denial from some of it or not having really thought about it, but it's impacting your decision. So I think the notion of having somebody where you can consistently talk about it and think through it consistently, not just once, which is why this partnership really matters.
Sorry, I disappeared for a second because we have notes all over the walls. Although it looks gorgeous on screen, it's totally
a
not.
Around us.
I mean, we are wearing pants, but I mean, but around us, just so you know, there's a lot of mess. But I was looking for my notes. So someone asked that question about Mackey runs a series on how to develop toughness in children. He used to coach NBA basketball players, actually coach one of the top players right now in the NBA. And he had a comment that I wanted to find, which was, he said, take away their ability to mess up. It's taking away their ability to take risk. Said another way, when you take away someone's ability to mess up, you're taking away their ability to learn and grow. You can't learn to get better at something if you don't have the space to mess up. The problem with emotions is that the older you get, right, there is almost no space for you to get it wrong. What space do we have as adults in our lives where you get to have an emotional tantrum? When you get to be completely irrationally angry and say the things that, by the way, everything you say will matter, right? Where do you get to do that? Where do you get to say things like, you know what, I'm so down that I almost don't want to even live. And next thing you know, that throws up alarms and everyone's like, oh my God, we need to get professional help. We need to get medication. We need to get this. Everyone's just throwing advice at you nonstop. And where do I get to have the space just to be there? Be there in this negative feeling of either rage, anger, or like sad depression. Because we're taught, they're almost like kind of, if you ever like, during the vacation, I did marshmallows on the beach, right? And so as you put fire and logs and the things spill out, like they're hot coals in different places. Well, you quickly learn to not step on the hot coals or the hot sand. That's what these zones represent. They're like zones of hot sand or hot coals. You step on it, it's like ouch, and you jump out of it and go further away. And so by not having the space to mess up and figure out what it feels like, to do it
I
wrong?
think this is a great question, actually. Sorry, I'm just,
Yeah.
I think Tiffany, you asked, Tiffany from H&K, I think she's in Miami, right? How do you coach someone on your team who consistently demonstrates poor judgment? I don't know, Tiffany, if you want to unmute yourself and give a little more context, you can.
Sure, thank you. So I am the lead on a 3-person team, and the number 2 person came into our organization about a year ago. I've been in our organization about 20 years, and he has a lot of really great ideas. But when it comes to working across departments and across teams and interacting with other people, things always seem to break down at the point where he has to exercise judgment and figure out how to implement the idea. And so I've told him, I want to give you the space to, be independent and autonomous, but come to me if you have questions. But instead, I'm often brought in once things have gone off the rails. And it usually comes back to sort of a judgment that he's made that is just problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually a great question. There was a quote that we got a while back from someone that I loved. They talked about strategy, right? An idea oftentimes is strategy. And in the industrial age, people valued strategy and ideas at such big levels. And if the boss likes that idea, you go and get it done, right? The idea of insubordination and not getting it done, I'm going to put bonuses, rewards, and stuff and inspection markers and get that done. But oftentimes what you will hear nowadays from leaders, right, and maybe this individual feels this way, is I had such a great idea, but people weren't executing it. It wasn't getting done, right? The strategy that isn't being executed. And this individual said, there is no such thing as good strategy that is divorced from execution.
Strategy cannot be divorced from execution.
It is one and the same.
All the same.
An idea that does not get executed is a bad idea, right? And I'm mentioning this because obviously this person is overweighting the value of the idea, but not, putting enough attention on, wait, it's not getting executed.
I think as leaders, just in general, we overweight the value of the idea though too, right? Because we get excited, you can't, it's like natural as a leader, you want people to get stuff done. So when they have a good idea, and especially if it's their idea, you want them to run with it. But the skills to execute on that, to your point, Tiffany, where they're making bad judgment calls, and it's tied to, I forget if we taught this in a past flip or where it was, but we talk about the need for 7+ decisions in a row. It's not just one decision. And this is where it goes off the rails, right? They leave your office, they start going, and they make one good call. Then the next call they make is bad. And it's a series of little tiny judgment calls all put together in short sequence, and maybe even in like a 7-day window that needs to happen for it to work. So I think as individuals, we all feel like it's like 1 or 2 really great decisions is going to make it work so much harder.
Yes. So yeah, I love what Megan's touching on. So challenge this individual to think about the idea as in the rightness of what they want to get done in packets of 7+, meaning 7 right calls have to be made. So can you complete and think through all 7? Because a lot of times the idea, well, I just made 1 right call, which is the idea, and then I step away and everyone should have gone the rest of it right, isn't good enough. To reach success, you need to think of it in packages of 7.
But then I was thinking about the need to build a ramp, right? Like to help in terms of like building a ramp, whatever this project is, it might need to be chunked out a little bit, right, into phases, as opposed to just, I don't know what the project is, how big it is, how important it is, but some sort of practice ground where it's a smaller ramp where you can kind of gate it to something bigger. But the other piece I thought about, Tiffany, is the mindset that he's in. Like, I don't know how, when we talk about PEMS and emotion being the greatest imbalance, one of the worst things that can happen in emotions is, especially in business, is you start to feel desperate. When you feel desperate to get anything done because you want to prove your value, especially he's only been in the company a year, you've been there 20 years, he's the number 2. Like, he's got to feel a lot of pressure.
To be smart, bringing good ideas. And obviously if those ideas don't work, it's fascinating what people do. They double down to actually try to force the next idea in, because you hope that if I fire 6 shots, right, 1 of them will land and then you will see the value in me.
And to think about long-term doing the right thing versus short-term outcome focus, we just usually make the wrong call when you're so obsessed on what you're trying to get done,
And
prove
what,
your value.
and what a
right?
sports coach would you say? Timeout, right?
Yeah.
Because you keep shooting and pushing forward, and more idea after idea isn't the solution here. In fact, it's only going to get worse and often spirals down. The thing that we always talk about is bring it to light. If you can help this individual bring to light the chain of how it goes from idea to what then happens in the last event. So not hypothetically, but in actual practice, and let them do that first cut and saying, I want you to be honest with me on this. Not because I'm going to use this to get rid of them, which I'm assuming you're not looking to get rid of them. But if you want to coach them truly, they have to believe your intention is to help audit the path of what happened. And they can make the first cut, then you can help review it to then have them go back and do it. But we often have very fuzzy memories of how things went apart and fell apart. And so if you can help them bring to light the exact, mapping of it and paper it and then review it together, it can become a tool to create that awareness of where it falls apart. It's not that idea was bad, but it falls apart somewhere.
And it's probably thematic, right? There's probably something similar he's doing across every project. If you could figure out what that theme is, you'd be able to help him at a whole different level. Hopefully that helps, Tiffany. I know there's a bunch of other questions in here that I haven't had a chance to truly look through, but I can't wait for the class next week because I feel like going through how to set this up and how to actually have conflict. I see there's a lot of questions about.
Yeah, I think Shaniqua talked about, you're saying the percentages represent about the amount of time you should dedicate towards training. So the answer is yes. I want you to think of the highest performing individuals. They're a lifelong training. There's lifelong learning, lifelong training. And so when you think about minus the extreme end data points of being a complete toddler where, once again, you're all about better me, or when you're towards the real end of your life where most of it is about trying to just give much more than, kind of develop your cup. The bulk, most of us, the percentages represent, and we'll put it up on our site as well, how to think directionally, right? It's not precision, but directionally of how you should be thinking of spending your energy in terms of your time and resources, anywhere from a monthly and maybe even down to a weekly basis. And if you're able to bake that in and kind of look at the audit of that across a weekly basis of putting in training at that interval, your chance of hitting higher performance consistently would be higher. And you'll see the flip side. Wherever you have the imbalance against that spectrum and where it's greatest, you will see that's where things fall apart.
And I think Dawn Rowan, you're asking about implementing like higher emotions at work is challenging when everybody's at 16-year-old level. What do we suggest? There is a larger organizational program we've developed called PRT. So it's like a pre-resilience training program. It's a 13-week program. And the punchline is this: everybody is in it. So everybody is spending 1 hour a week actually going through the things that hold them back. It's really like a boot camp for yourself, right? To kind of discover the challenges and the things that hold you back. And we call them red arrow behaviors, and the things that actually you do to prevent getting truth from other people. So what are the things that you can dial down? Those behaviors, like subtle little behaviors we've built over time that prevent other people from telling us the truth. Because the reality is, if you're getting the truth, you won't act like a 16-year-old, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. If you're getting the truth, you're not going to keep acting the way you are. But we make it so hard for people to tell us the truth. So we built an entire program. It's a 13-week program. But the point is that everybody's in it, and everybody's training, and everybody's spending consistently 1 hour a week with a small team of about 8 to 10 people, where they're all going through this. And I think that's something that at the organizational level is helpful, because when everybody's training to improve their intelligence, really it's all emotional, it's all tied to character. And
I think there's a lot of questions around looking at what are the best EQ resources, right? How do I basically enhance this imbalance? Basically, how do I grow up from my 16-year-old emotional self is really the challenge. And I think there is no greater resource to help you than another human being. Now, that comes with its own challenge, right? 16-year-olds training 16-year-olds, right? It comes wrought with challenges, which is what we will talk about much more depth next week. But there is no book, there is no video, there is no video game, nor drug or anything that can take the place of human judgment. Another human being right? I mean, there's a part where we like to believe we figured out every variation. So it's like a, you know, if this, then that. So you can just plug in your whatever your emotion thought is right now in the system, and it tells you, if you're feeling angry, calm down, right? Or if you're feeling sad, cheer up. Yet there are places where that's the worst advice. If you're feeling angry, I want you to get angrier, right? Where does that exist?
Yeah.
And does that even make sense to some people? Or if you're feeling sad, let's go into it even deeper. Let's understand the root cause of it. Let's go into the real reasons and get even more depressed before we come out. And that notion is so counterintuitive that computers can't help you. A system that is not another human being cannot. And so this is where judgment is trained, rubbing up against another teammate, against another person.
Yeah. Well, this is where I know, Josh, you were asking, and you know, about this fear, right? It's scary, right? Because you're operating, Josh, you can unmute if you want to, because I think this is the crux of the issue, right?
Yes.
Because everybody and Josh teaches a class about being your authentic self. Who doesn't want to just share intuition and be yourself versus having to, what we call LHFing, lying, hiding, faking, where you feel like you have to pretend to be somebody who you're not. That's ultimately where you want to get to in life, where you can just be yourself, right? But that's like the nirvana. You can be yourself at work and not be a different person at home, different person at work. But it comes with challenges. Josh, do you want to unmute real quick?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we run up against. To Charlie's point earlier, you know, you're arguing about the fakeness versus what's actually really going on, because everyone wants to be PC or whatever words you want to use. You don't want to show your true emotions. So, I mean, to even get like what you guys have with your talking partners is great. But I've tried to institute talking partners, and I've had to, there's always a promotional gap because none of us are at the same level, and it makes it very hard to express any kind of like, man, I am not understanding this. I know this isn't politically correct or whatever, but I don't understand this. And then you look at that person's eyes and you're like, ooh, I just lost status with them because I didn't understand it, right? Because they're not willing to go to that point. They might not understand it, but whatever. So it's very tough.
So I think we're going to break that down in a level of detail that we haven't in the past. But I think one way to think about this is think about the things that you would say that would make you lose status with them, right? Make you lose influence or trust with them. So I think about, imagine having a person in your life where you could do that.
Yes, amen.
Right?
That's the key.
Right?
But I will tell you though, can I tell you though? I know people probably have to go, whatever. I was just thinking about how, I mean, obviously I'm 4 years younger than Charlie. I was an intern, right? And then I groomed up to be at this. There was a window, I think it was very hard for Charlie to show any vulnerability, to show he's the CEO of this company, that he didn't know something. And it didn't really happen until, what was when the whole thing blew up? It was like
17 years.
17 years.
17 years, never vulnerable, never even shed one tear growing the business. And then I think
it was
that
in 2000 and when Jackson was little.
So it's 26 years now.
So Brendan was just about to be born. So 2012. It was 8 years ago.
So 10 years ago.
Oh, okay.
10 years ago, right? So around 10 years ago was the first time that I showed emotion in the company. And
you think to the point you just made, Josh, which is like, oh God, I just looked in their eyes and I lost status. And I'll be totally, it was like the crowd erupted because Charlie ruled with an iron fist. He was he had learned, anyways, it's a longer story, right?
Become a nice guy.
He became a nice guy. But and so there's like a fear, and a healthy fear, but sometimes not so healthy fear of Charlie. But once he kind of admitted that like he was struggling with something in our staff meeting, and after never having shared anything like that before, I mean, it was like a whole different Charlie. It was like people were like, you know, I would like jump off a cliff for you. I would follow you anywhere. It's like it completely changed the dynamic. Now, if you do it too much to too many people so consistently, it's bad.
I completely agree. I've done that, but I did it once I was in the leadership position. It's much easier to show vulnerability in the leadership position than it is to show vulnerability up when that person owns your promotion or whatever.
Which, Josh, I look at it similar to this idea. So it's interesting. TPs began as talking partners, but we really moved to training partners. Think about finding that gym buddy, that running buddy, right? If you want to run a marathon, you're running.
Yeah.
So you don't take the world's marathon champion and say, hey, will you be my running buddy? Right? That being an extreme example of like, it's got to be someone in research, they call it proximal zone of development.
Yeah,
It's got to be within a few levels of your
But it
development.
doesn't have to be an exact peer. It can be within levels.
Proximal zone.
Proximal
Usually it's a
zone.
couple, it's like they say
Yeah.
for startups, get advice from founders that are 1 or 2 funding rounds ahead of you.
I really think though, Josh, to that point, in the short run, yes, you look like an idiot and they think, oh God, you don't know what you're doing, and then promotion and all that. And I think there was a window where Charlie thought, out of our leadership team, I knew the least, right? Because I would ask the stupid questions. I definitely made myself look probably, like Charlie Munger talks about, pretty stupid, right? But because I really didn't know. And I learned over time that, you know what? Nobody else in the room knew either. And that's the part that used to drive me crazy, because I would go after and say, can anybody explain to me what we just talked about? Because I was completely in my head in that meeting. I don't understand a word Charlie was talking about, and now I'm lost. They didn't know either. They didn't know either. And in the long run, it helped me succeed, right? In the short run, it's very painful. It's very painful to compare, because it looks like other people understand. Now, and I think it probably did impact how you looked at me, Charlie, like in terms of, am I going to promote her or whatnot? But like, it actually didn't. If you think about it, it didn't, in our case.
Well, yeah, I think it's more like poker, right? Like you might win a hand or two by faking and bluffing, but in the long run, if you have the real deal, you're gonna to Adam Grant's point, givers and takers, right? Like the giver might be slow to grow, but in the end, the relationships and everything will just be overpowering, and so I agree with that.
It's funny when you watch even the example of poker and poker tournaments, you think everyone's bluffing, right? The champions, they rarely bluff. In fact, but when they do, that's a critical bluff. The ones who usually never win, they're bluffing all the time, and so they always get caught bluffing. And so you'll be surprised how little, and the best of the best, actually bluffing is part of their strategy. It's rarely used, much less than people think. It's all the amateurs that think it's all about good bluffing, because in the camera and the TVs, they show the highlight of the bluffing. And yet, out of however many thousands of hands they'll play, I mean, you'll see maybe 2. It's so small, and so that notion you asked again of, fear of being truly yourself, right? Especially in the stuff that we haven't processed, that's kind of ugly and messy. There is no other way to learn how to process it than with another human being, and so that's what we'll touch on next week, right? And that's the only way you can grow and get better at it. And like anything, you can get better at it. All right.
On that note, I like how Chris said it. The goal for the day is not to be a 16-year-old. Let's go for the day.
We want to be 16 and a half by next week when we meet.